What if the United States had adopted the metric system much earlier? What if Joseph Dumbey's ship, lost in 1793, had made it to America and delivered the metric system during George Washington's presidency? Would this small change have drastically altered America's future? What would our country look like today if this seemingly insignificant event had unfolded differently? Imagine a world where the very foundation of America's measurement system was different, shaping everything from political decisions to daily life. It's a question that challenges the very course of history as we know it. In today's video, we'll explore how such a seemingly small event could have set America on a completely different path, one that might have affected everything from trade to diplomacy, and even the very identity of the United States itself. Buckle up, because we're diving into an alternate timeline that could have radically altered the history of the United States. The path we take today could have led to a stronger, more unified nation, or one deeply divided by this one pivotal change. We'll look at the historical context of the 1790s, the tensions surrounding George Washington's presidency, and the revolutionary concept of the metric system that was emerging across the Atlantic. We'll dive into how adopting the metric system early on could have shifted America's domestic policies and international relations. What would it mean for American trade, for its relationship with Europe, or even its national identity? And finally, we'll speculate on how this change could have shaped the future of the nation in ways we might never have imagined. If you're enjoying this thought-provoking journey into alternate history, don't forget to subscribe, share this video, and leave a comment below. Help us grow What If History to 10,000 subscribers, and let us know what other what-if scenarios you'd like us to explore next. Let's first understand the America of 1793. The country was fresh from its hard-won independence, with George Washington at the helm, a young nation still grappling with issues of governance, unification, and foreign diplomacy. It was a time of experimentation, with new ideas about nation-building emerging every day. The Founding Fathers were tasked with turning the promise of the Revolution into a functioning, stable government. But the road was anything but smooth. In 1793, the United States was barely a decade old. The young nation was struggling to find its footing in a world dominated by powerful European empires. The country faced an array of challenges, both internally and externally, that would test its resilience. The economy was fragile, still recovering from the devastation of the Revolutionary War, and the government was burdened with a massive national debt. This debt was a direct result of financing the war, and now it posed a significant obstacle to economic stability. Washington's administration was busy establishing the framework of government. The first 2 years of his presidency saw the creation of key institutions, such as the executive departments of State, Treasury, and War, which were meant to handle the nation's foreign relations, finances, and defense. However, despite these advancements, the government was far from unified. There was a stark divide between factions within the political establishment. The Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, favored a strong central government, while the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, feared too much power in the hands of the federal government and favored more states' rights. Externally, America was caught between the warring factions of Europe. The French Revolution was in full swing, and France was at war with Britain. The United States, trying to remain neutral, found itself in a delicate position, navigating its relationship with both France and Britain. This struggle for neutrality would ultimately be one of the major challenges of Washington's presidency. But perhaps the most pressing issue of 1793 was the economic instability that threatened to unravel the nation. The country was deeply in debt, and the government lacked a solid financial system. It was in this context that the issue of currency and measurement systems began to take center stage. Would the United States continue using the old British system of weights and measures, or would it strike out on its own and develop a new system, one that could be used across the vast land of the new nation? These internal and external challenges were shaping the very foundation of the United States. The country was young, vulnerable, and full of potential, but its future remained uncertain. This backdrop is crucial to understanding how the adoption of the metric system, if it had happened earlier, could have had a lasting impact on America's path to becoming the world power it is today. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Europe was beginning to experiment with new forms of measurement. In 1790, France passed a revolutionary law that established the metric system, sparking debates that would spread throughout the continent. But could this new system have found its way across the Atlantic to the United States? The timing, the context, and the political climate in America were all factors that could have played a role in determining whether such a transformation was possible. The origins of the metric system can be traced back to the chaos of the French Revolution. As France sought to break free from the old regimes, there was a push for a new, more rational and standardized system in all aspects of life. The existing system of measurements, based on local customs and the remnants of medieval practices, was inefficient and inconsistent. Trade, science, and daily life were all hindered by this lack of standardization. It was during this time of radical change that a group of French intellectuals, including the likes of the mathematician Joseph Louis Lagrange and the astronomer Jean-Baptiste Joseph Delambre, pushed for the creation of a universal measurement system that could be used across the world. In 1790, the French National Assembly passed a law that authorized the creation of the metric system. The system was based on the idea of scientific precision. The meter was defined as 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the North Pole to the equator, providing a standardized and universal unit of length. The metric system was meant to be simple and logical, with units based on powers of 10, making calculations and conversions far easier than the complex and arbitrary systems that had existed before. Alongside the meter, other units such as the kilogram and liter were introduced, each based on similar principles of scientific measurement. Napoleon Bonaparte, who would rise to power in the years that followed, saw the metric system as a tool for unifying France and consolidating his power. He embraced the system as part of his broader vision of a modern, centralized state. Under Napoleon's leadership, the metric system was not only adopted within France, but also spread to the territories he conquered across Europe. In this way, the metric system became a symbol of the French Revolution's ideals: reason, progress, and equality. The system gained further traction as it spread throughout Europe. By the early 19th century, countries like Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain had adopted the metric system, largely due to their political and economic ties to France. The metric system became a symbol of modernity and scientific advancement, and the debate over its adoption was no longer just about practicality. It was also about aligning with the progressive ideals of the time. But could this new system have found its way across the Atlantic? In theory, it was possible. The United States, despite its own young government and internal struggles, was still closely tied to European political and intellectual movements. But why is the metric system so crucial? You might think that it's just about inches and feet versus centimeters and meters, but it's far more than that. A unified measurement system is at the heart of national identity, economic growth, and international influence. There's a seemingly small change, but adopting a standardized system of measurement can have far-reaching consequences, shaping everything from trade to politics and even the cultural fabric of a nation. In Europe, the adoption of the metric system wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was a vital tool for centralizing control and consolidating power. Before the metric system, Europe was a patchwork of different measurement systems, each varying by country, region, and even city. Merchants and tradespeople often struggled to deal with incompatible weights and measures, making cross-border trade inefficient and complicated. For example, the length of a foot in France was different from the length of a foot in England, making the process of conducting business between nations cumbersome and inefficient. The introduction of the metric system by France in the late 18th century provided a solution to this issue. By offering a universal system based on decimalization and scientific principles, the French were able to simplify and standardize measurements across their country. This was more than just a practical improvement. It was an expression of the revolutionary ideals of the time. The metric system embodied the values of reason, equality, and progress, helping to solidify the identity of a modern French state that sought to unify its people and align with the rest of Europe. As European countries adopted the metric system, they not only modernized their trade, but also asserted their power and influence on the global stage. A unified system of measurement allowed nations to streamline commerce, making it easier to export goods, set prices, and navigate international trade. For instance, by adopting the metric system, France improved its ability to negotiate with other European powers and eventually spread its influence across the continent, especially during the Napoleonic era. Countries that adopted the metric system were now part of a broader unified economic framework, which allowed them to compete on a global scale. Moreover, the metric system played a crucial role in the Industrial Revolution. The growth of factories, railroads, and telegraphs demanded standardization. A unified system of measurement helped European nations ensure that industrialization was efficient and scalable. It allowed engineers, manufacturers, and scientists to communicate and collaborate more effectively, creating the foundation for modern technological advancement. The metric system, then, was not just a tool for trade and industry. It became a symbol of national power and global influence. It allowed European countries to project themselves as modern, progressive nations, able to participate fully in the rapidly changing world of the 19th century. Without a standard system of measurement, it would have been far more difficult for these nations to maintain their positions of strength in a global economy. For the United States, the question of adopting the metric system wasn't just about making calculations easier, it was about positioning the country as a competitive player in a world dominated by powerful European nations. A unified system of measurement could have been a powerful tool for the fledgling American economy. In our alternate scenario, we imagine that Joseph Dumbey's ship did indeed reach America in 1793. Dumbey, an obscure yet significant character in history, was attempting to bring the French metric system to the United States. He was a Frenchman with a vision, seeking to introduce a revolutionary new system of measurement to a nation still in its infancy. What if he succeeded? What if his ship made it to America's shores, carrying not just a cargo of goods, but the seeds of a new and standardized measurement system that could change the course of history? Joseph Dumbey's actual voyage was an ill-fated one. In 1793, he set out from France with the intention of presenting the metric system to American leaders, hoping to introduce it as a unifying standard. Unfortunately, his journey was unsuccessful, with Dumbey's ship failing to make landfall in the United States. As a result, the metric system did not reach America during the critical period of the 1790s, and the nation continued to use the British imperial system of measurement for the next several centuries. But in this alternate history, Dumbey's voyage succeeds and the metric system makes its way to the young United States. How would this shift play out? The immediate political impact would have been profound. George Washington, as the first president of the United States, was at the center of decisions that would define the new country. Washington was known for his pragmatism and his willingness to adopt progressive ideas that could strengthen the Union. But would he embrace the metric system, a system rooted in revolutionary France? The answer is not straightforward. Washington was careful in balancing foreign influence, and with Europe embroiled in the French Revolution, he may have been cautious about aligning too closely with France. However, Washington was also deeply concerned with establishing a unified modern system for the fledgling republic. If he saw the metric system as a necessary tool for promoting trade and improving domestic coherence, he might have supported its introduction despite the political ramifications. On the other hand, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, two of the most powerful figures in Washington's cabinet, would have likely clashed over this issue. Jefferson, a staunch advocate for states' rights and an opponent of centralization, might have seen the metric system as an unnecessary foreign imposition. He was deeply suspicious of centralized power and may have viewed the adoption of a system championed by revolutionary France as a step too far. Jefferson, who favored agriculturalism and simplicity, might have found the metric system too complex and at odds with his vision of an agrarian republic. Hamilton, on the other hand, was a federalist and a proponent of a strong central government. He believed in the modernization of the United States, and as the country's first Treasury Secretary, he worked to build a financial system that would enable President Washington was already tasked with navigating a new republic, shaping the policies that would determine the future of the United States. The nation was fresh from war, in the throes of creating a stable government and facing the daunting challenge of securing its place in the global arena. Adopting the metric system would have been seen by many as a modern, forward-thinking move, an opportunity to align with Europe's progressive nations and signal to the world that the United States was ready to embrace the future. But was Washington ready for such a radical shift? Washington's presidency was characterized by pragmatism and caution. He was a man who understood the importance of unity and the dangers of divisiveness both internally and externally. The country was still fragile, and Washington was deeply concerned with establishing policies that would stabilize the nation. At the same time, he was a forward-thinking leader, aware that the U.S. needed to modernize and strengthen itself in order to compete with the established powers of Europe. The adoption of the metric system, therefore, would have been an intriguing proposition for him. Washington was no stranger to change, and he did embrace progressive ideas, most notably his support for a centralized federal government and a robust financial system. The system proposed by, of course, no change comes without resistance. The adoption of the metric system would not have been a simple or seamless transition, particularly in a young nation like the United States. Would Americans, particularly those in rural areas and those entrenched in existing trade systems, have embraced the metric system? The shift from the British imperial system to the metric system would have been a monumental change, one that touched nearly every aspect of daily life, from agriculture to commerce, from education to construction. Geographically, the United States was vast, with diverse populations spread across a wide range of terrains. The country's eastern seaboard, where many urban centers were located, was already heavily tied to European trade practices. But much of the interior, particularly the rural regions, had a very different relationship with measurement systems. Farmers, traders, and craftsmen in these areas relied on the established imperial system, which had been in use for centuries. To adopt the metric system would have required not just new tools and instruments, but a complete overhaul of how everyday business was conducted. Culturally, the shift to the metric system would have been viewed by many as a foreign imposition, especially given its association with revolutionary France. For many Americans, especially those in the more conservative factions of society, the metric system might have symbolized a break from tradition, a system that came not just from Europe, but from the radical ideas of the French Revolution. The very notion of such a system replacing the British imperial system, long seen as the standard in both everyday life and commerce, could have been met with suspicion and reluctance. Politically, the debate over the metric system would likely have become a battleground for the ideological factions of the time. The Federalists, who believed in a strong central government and had a vision of a modern industrialized United States, would likely have supported the adoption of the metric system as a symbol of progress. They would have argued that it was necessary to align with the growing influence of European powers, particularly in terms of trade and diplomacy. The metric system could have been seen as a unifying force, helping to standardize practices across the nation and improve its global standing. On the other hand, the anti-federalists, who were wary of centralization and favored a more agrarian republic, would likely have opposed such a change. They may have viewed the metric system as an unnecessary and foreign imposition, one that undermined states' rights and local autonomy. To them, the imperial system represented a more familiar and comfortable tradition, one that had been part of the country's heritage and culture. Let's take a look at how other nations adopted the metric system and the challenges they faced. France, for example, struggled to convince its citizens to use a new unfamiliar system. The metric system was introduced during the French Revolution as part of the broader drive for modernization and rationalization, but it was met with significant resistance from the public. People were deeply attached to the traditional systems of measurement, which were used in everyday life, commerce, and industry. The idea of replacing centuries-old units, like the foot and the pound, with new scientific ones, was viewed by many as both unnecessary and confusing. The French government, however, was determined to push through the metric system, and over time it became legally mandatory. Napoleon Bonaparte, ever the pragmatist, saw the metric system as a symbol of the stability and order his regime sought to establish. Under his rule, the metric system was extended throughout much of Europe, particularly in the territories that France controlled. Even though adoption was slow in some regions, the metric system gradually gained traction as it became increasingly necessary for trade, industry, and scientific research. Italy, like other European nations, faced its own challenges in adopting the metric system. After Napoleon's fall, the metric system was abandoned by some Italian states, but eventually the Kingdom of Italy, established in the mid-19th century, reintroduced it. The process of adoption in Italy was gradual, and again, resistance from both the public and local authorities was a significant hurdle. Some regions were more receptive to change than others, and it wasn't until the late 19th century that the metric system was fully integrated across the country. Other European countries, such as Spain, the Netherlands, and Belgium, also adopted the metric system after initial resistance, largely due to their political and economic ties with France. Each country faced its own unique set of challenges, from local customs and cultural inertia to economic factors that made the transition difficult. However, all of these nations ultimately succeeded in making the metric system the standard. So could America have done it faster or more efficiently than Europe? The short answer is it's possible, but it would have been a formidable challenge. Unlike France, which had a centralized government with strong leadership, the United States was still in the early stages of defining its political identity and stability. In the 1790s, America was still a loose confederation of states, with varying economic interests, cultural differences, and levels of development. While Europe had centuries of shared history and systems to build upon, the United States was just beginning to establish its own national identity. America was also geographically vast, with rural populations far removed from the intellectual and political centers of power. In contrast to France, where urban centers like Paris could drive political and cultural change, the United States faced challenges in reaching far-flung areas. Implementing a national system of measurement would have required overcoming deep regional differences and entrenched practices. However, America's young experimental nature might have also made the country more open to such a radical change. The idea of forging a new national identity and distancing itself from the British imperial system could have made the metric system an attractive choice. But would America have been able to adopt the system as swiftly and effectively as European nations, especially considering the internal resistance from figures like Jefferson and the challenges posed by the rural population? It's hard to say. The adoption of the metric system in Europe was driven by political necessity and the power of centralized governments, whereas the United States had a more fragmented political structure, which may have delayed or hindered the transition. In conclusion, while it's possible that America could have embraced the metric system with more success, the country's political, cultural, and geographic landscape in the 1790s would have presented significant challenges. The European experience shows that such a transition takes time, patience, and often strong governmental intervention, resources that might have been in short supply in the fledgling United States. The adoption of the metric system in America would have had far-reaching consequences. The consistency in measurements could have streamlined trade with European nations that had already adopted the system. As global trade grew in the 19th century, standardization became more crucial for efficient commerce. If the United States had embraced the metric system early on, it would have been better positioned to engage in smoother trade with European powers that had already integrated the metric system, such as France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. A common system of measurement would have removed barriers that arose from incompatible trade practices, making transactions more efficient and reducing confusion between American exporters and European markets. Economically, the benefits of adopting the metric system could have been profound. A unified system of measurement would have simplified industrial processes, especially as America began to industrialize in the 19th century. Factories, railroads, and emerging technologies relied on precise measurements for mass production, and the metric system's decimal-based structure would have been particularly advantageous. The ease of conversion and standardization in the metric system could have accelerated technological innovation, as manufacturers, engineers, and scientists would have had a common language for their work, boosting productivity and efficiency. Furthermore, America's growing industrial sector would have been able to better integrate with European markets, increasing exports and fostering international trade relations. A more consistent and efficient economy would have also helped strengthen America. By the 19th century, the United States could have been seen as an economic and political leader. A country that adopted the metric system early might have positioned itself as an international trade hub, bridging the gap between Europe and the emerging economies of the Americas and Asia. With the metric system already established in much of Europe, the US could have leveraged this connection to solidify itself as a key player in global commerce. Instead of grappling with trade inefficiencies due to differing measurement systems, America could have seamlessly integrated into the international economy, making it an attractive partner for countries eager to streamline trade. What would that mean for America's global standing in the 19th and 20th centuries? Early adoption of the metric system could have elevated the US to the forefront of international trade, creating economic stability and boosting its reputation as a progressive modern nation. As trade networks expanded globally, American industries, particularly in manufacturing, could have benefited from standardized measurements, leading to lower costs, faster production, and stronger international ties. This early move might have positioned the US as a key player in shaping global trade standards and policy, accelerating its rise to the economic superpower it would eventually become in the 20th century. Speculating further, early adoption of the metric system could have had a profound impact on America's industrial revolution and technological advancements. The United States, already on the cusp of industrialization in the early 1800s, could have seen a faster, more unified progression in fields like railroads, engineering, and factory manufacturing. The ease of adopting a standardized measurement system would have allowed American innovators to collaborate more effectively with European counterparts, creating an environment of accelerated technological growth. The metric system's decimal-based structure would have simplified complex calculations in science and engineering, potentially fostering breakthroughs in areas like electrical engineering, chemistry, and eventually computer science. In terms of international relations, the metric system could have been more than just a tool for trade and industry. It could have become a symbol of America's alignment with the global community of industrialized nations. By adopting the metric system early, the United States might have gained more influence in international organizations and treaties, as it would have been seen as a nation willing to embrace modern standards. It might have established itself as a central figure in global economic policy, able to negotiate from a position of strength with European powers and emerging economies. In essence, the early adoption of the metric system could have accelerated the US' transformation from a fledgling nation into a major global power, driving its economic growth, technological leadership, and geopolitical influence throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Fast forward to the 20th century. If the metric system had been adopted earlier, would the political landscape of the US have shifted? Would we have seen fewer debates over the metric system later on? The answer is likely yes. Adopting the metric system early would have had a lasting impact on American politics, potentially changing how the nation interacted with the rest of the world and how it managed internal issues surrounding standardization. By the 20th century, the United States had become a global economic and political leader. If the metric system had been established as the standard from the 1790s, the ongoing debates over measurement systems would have been largely eliminated. In the real timeline, the metric system remained a controversial topic throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, with various attempts at adoption facing political resistance from both the public and lawmakers. These debates often revolved around the costs of conversion, concerns over the disruption of existing systems, and a deep-seated cultural attachment to the imperial system. Had the US adopted the metric system early on, this political battle would likely have been avoided. The country would have built its identity around the use of standardized, globally recognized measurements from the beginning, and this system would have been deeply ingrained in American culture, law, and industry by the time the 20th century arrived. The push for the metric system in the 1970s, which included debates on whether the US should make the transition, might never have happened. The issue would have been resolved long before, creating a more unified approach to measurement in both the domestic and international spheres. This early adoption could have also altered the way the United States approached international treaties and its political relationships with countries still using the imperial system. The US might have been more integrated into global political and economic systems, particularly in areas like trade, science, and diplomacy. It's likely that the US would have positioned itself as a more progressive and unified nation, willing to align with international norms. Countries that had adopted the metric system, particularly those in Europe, might have viewed the US as more in sync with their standards, leading to smoother diplomatic relations. On the other hand, the US might have encountered some resistance from countries that continued to use the imperial system, like the United Kingdom. The long-standing rivalry between the US and Britain could have found new expression in these political disagreements, but overall, early adoption would likely have strengthened the US's position in international negotiations, particularly with emerging powers in the 20th century. In terms of domestic politics, the elimination of the metric system debate could have freed up space for other pressing issues. Without the need for years of discussion and political wrangling over measurement systems, the government could have directed its attention toward more immediate concerns, such as civil rights, economic reform, and foreign policy. The question of whether to adopt the metric system might have been seen as an issue settled in the country's early years, enabling politicians to focus on more significant challenges. In sum, adopting the metric system earlier would have likely shifted the political landscape in the US, both domestically and could Joseph Dumbey's ship reaching America in 1793 have truly changed the course of American history. The impact on the metric system and on America itself is impossible to fully predict. However, one thing is certain: small events can have massive ripple effects. The potential of a single ship carrying the metric system to the United States highlights how pivotal moments in history, often overlooked or seemingly insignificant, can alter the course of an entire nation. We've explored how, in this alternate scenario, the early adoption of the metric system might have reshaped America's political, economic, and cultural landscape. From smoother international trade to a stronger industrial base, adopting the metric system could have positioned the US as a leader in global commerce much earlier. It might have streamlined economic growth, bolstered technological advancement, and strengthened diplomatic relations with European nations. But we've also seen the resistance America would have faced: political factions, geographical challenges, and cultural attachments to the existing system. Leaders like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Alexander Hamilton would have had to navigate these complexities, with their differing views likely influencing the system's adoption. We've speculated about the long-term effects, including how the metric system could have influenced America's rise as a global superpower, not only in the 19th century, but into the 20th. Would America's early adoption of the metric system have changed its approach to international treaties, or its standing in a world dominated by European powers? Could the absence of debates over measurement systems have freed up political capital for more urgent national issues? Of course, this is all speculative. The what-if scenario of Joseph Dumbey's ship making it to America introduces an alternate history, one where the course of the United States and its relationship to the world might have unfolded differently. But the key takeaway is this: the seemingly minor events and decisions we often overlook, like the arrival of a single ship carrying the idea of a standardized measurement system, can have profound and lasting consequences. This exercise in alternate history serves as a reminder that history is full of pivotal moments, some of which may not even be on our radar. What other what-ifs could have shaped the world as we know it? What if key decisions had been made differently? It's a fascinating thought experiment, and one that challenges us to rethink the way we understand our past, and how that past has shaped our present. If you've enjoyed exploring this alternate history with us, please like and comment below. What other alternate history scenarios would you like us to dive into next? The possibilities are endless, and we want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with all our future videos, where we'll continue to challenge history as we know it and uncover the what-ifs that could have changed everything. Thanks for watching, and we can't wait to take you on the next journey through time.